Heresy Alpha, Book 1 of the Marian Imperium by Richard Warren. Chapter 6. Agnes. The Meshita shone in the naked sun, its mass of white concrete like snow amidst the dust, as if some demon had upended the peak of a faraway mountain and transplanted it to the desert. Even from the far end of Thebes' abandoned magistral, the sight inspired Agnes with a profound sense of unease. She signalled to the legionnaires to fan out, and they advanced in a wide defile, picking their way among the debris. It was no longer just concrete and brick. The whole avenue was strewn with shards of rusted metal. The battle had clearly been hardest fought there. As they neared the Meshita's perimeter, overturned vehicles could be seen too, half covered in sand. It was unclear what or whose they had been, but they looked like late medieval oil-powered trucks. There were rumours that they were still used in some parts of the Caliphate. Others of her legion, who'd been stationed in the east, even claimed to have driven them, but those were just idle boasts. She'd never met anyone who knew how. Headquarters of the Religious Politburo, Strabon said, pointing at a crumbling facade nearby, always nearest the Meshita in Caliphate towns. Agnes eyed the bombed-out portal. The vestiges of official-looking Saracen script were visible over the entrance. Beside the illegible lettering was the faint rust-coloured outline of a crescent moon encircling a double-headed hammer. They drew up beneath the giant orbital walls of the Meshita's perimeter. Up close, the illusion of pale stone was replaced by a pock-marked face, riddled with bullet holes and blast damage. 20 passes high and constructed of thick white reinforced concrete, they were easily defended and had surely withstood that last siege for some time. Even today, centuries later, you couldn't have asked for a better spot to hold out. The midday sun beat down pitilessly overhead. The buildings undulated in the desert heat. The walls offered only the narrowest strip of shade to the officers. The rest of the legionnaires knelt in the sun, the sweat pouring from their berets and dripping from their khakis. They hadn't broken march since they set out. It wouldn't be long before one among the 30 fainted. She had to get them out of the sun soon. Scouts have circled perimeter, Strabon said, as they pressed up against the concrete. No hostile installations to report. Layout and entrance points? Agnes asked. Strabon tapped his holowatch. A three-dimensional hologram projected in the shade, rotating with the movement of his fingers. Agnes scrutinised the neon lines as they flitted about like gnats. Orbital walls with a single gateway. Inside, a large colonnaded court surrounding the actual Meshita, a 2-story domed rotunda. A crumbling minaret, no longer safe to ascend. One way in and one way out, with no oversight position. It was far from ideal. "Junge," she ordered. Rifles in hand, the legionnaires drew up on either side of the dilapidated archway. She stood in its shade, listening. All was quiet, save for the rapid breath of her soldiers on the back of her neck. Her boots baked in the sand piled against the concrete. Not a single bird could be seen in the sky's aquamarine expanse. Even nature seemed to have taken leave of Thebes. As if the archway were a portal to a place life itself had forsaken. Her heart thumped in her chest. The malaise that had been gnawing at her all day was still with her. He roused herself. This was unlike her. There was nothing to be afraid of. It was just her old friends, the fear and excitement of the chase. Besides, such weakness didn't befit a centurion. She had to focus. Her green eyes narrowed on Strabon on the other side of the arch. His dark eyes held her gaze. The same question was in them that had been there all morning, the same one her wolfhound had asked her on every childhood expedition. Should they go on? She knew the answer was yes. That it had to be yes. The Meshita was the best defensive position in Thebes, an ideal hideout for the drug smugglers. If she left it unexplored, her mission would be incomplete. It was true that there was only one way in and one way out. True that the risk of ambush was high, True that she was risking the lives of her troops, that she was risking Strabon's life and her own, but if she couldn't take risks, she'd never have made Spear. And for all his caution, even Marcus had told her that a calculated risk was sometimes justified. She had to see it through. "O Panna Maria," Agnes prayed to the Virgin in her native Ruthenian, "visit upon me in this hour." She raised her fist and led on in, Strabon at her heels, heading straight for the colonnade encircling the Meshita's court. She took the left side and Strabon the right, each with a detachment of 12 legionnaires. A few soldiers hung back to guard the entrance. The sandstone rotunda reared up in the middle of the court, like some giant mole burrowing out of the desert. It was clear the entirety of its surface had once been intricately carved with painted arabesques and crescents. In places, traces of faded ochre and turquoise could still be seen. For the briefest moment, Agnes even caught herself admiring the work of such heresy. Yet the unsparing sun also revealed a scene of utter desolation. The carved stonework was cratered on all sides, dappled with bullet holes and shattered from the impact of mortars. Rusted metal, discarded munitions, and shards of exploded stone littered the court like a titan's discarded fingernails. Agnes had never seen anything like it, and felt a familiar pang of regret. It had to have been some battle. If only she had been born 2 centuries earlier, during the Third War of Religion, or better yet, in Justinia's day itself. What she wouldn't have given to have been at her side during the Battle of the Red Apple Tree, when the Holy Maiden vanquished the infidel and the shame of Mansicat was undone. Strabon signalled to her from the colonnade opposite. His group had scouted the other side, and, as with her own, there was nothing to report. He motioned to the far end of the court. Agnes nodded and led on under the left wing of the arcade. Strabon did likewise, disappearing behind the rotunda. She flinched. She was always least comfortable without him at her side. The legionnaires clambered awkwardly over the tumbled masonry, looking about nervously as they went. None had ever seen a battlefield, let alone a battle. The Anatolian woman, smarting in the desert heat, had removed her beret. Catching Agnes's eye, she quickly replaced it. Even Agnes was beginning to feel slightly light-headed. Before her, the colonnade receded in a never-ending crescent, whirling in an endless dance like some unholy circus. She kept looking at the Meshita, hoping to spy a door in its walls, but its sinuous carvings had neither end nor beginning. The lines became waves. She felt dizzy. Something glimmered in the colonnade. Up ahead, a figure flashed into view before turning aside. The hem of a white skirt lingered beside a column, then vanished. She started, looking back to see if the others had noticed, but there was no one there. She had left her group behind, and the entranceway was out of sight too. There was nothing but the endless recession of the arcade. She felt alone. "We found it, Katapana," Strabon's voice rent the silence as he appeared around a bend ahead and strode up to her, elated. She felt a wave of relief. The others soon caught up too. The ghost of the white skirt faded from her mind. It was just a momentary lapse. Marcus would never have succumbed to such weakness. She couldn't have her legionnaires see it. She was their centurion. "Lead on," she commanded. Retracing his steps, Strabon halted a few passes on and pointed at a heap of rubble piled against the wall of the Meshita. Stepping out of the shade, Agnes examined the stones. It wasn't clear how it could be an entrance. Her brows furrowed. Strabon simply pointed at the wall. Directly above the stones, in faded red paint, was the outline of a crescent moon and double-headed adze. Clever Strabon. He was right. Someone had deliberately concealed the entrance. She smiled. "Clear it," she ordered. Strabon waved his hand. The soldiers began lifting the rubble aside, but despite their number, it was slow work. Most of the stone and concrete blocks were enormous, and some took 2 or 3 legionnaires to shift. Agnes paced up and down. Whoever had placed them there really meant to deter any intruders. The question was why. She must find out. Gradually, the upper lintel of a doorway emerged. Strabon hurried the troops along. Beneath the sandstone, steel glinted in the sun. Metallic doors. She grew excited. They were heavy and would definitely need some kind of explosive, but they were only steel. Steel. That was odd. The last religious war had ended 200 years earlier. How had the Caliphate been able to build like that in those days? A loud crash interrupted her thoughts, accompanied by a cry of pain. The Anatolian lay beside the door, clutching her leg in anguish. A few legionnaires already knelt beside her. Agnes frowned. The woman must have tripped in her haste. "I'm sorry, Katapana," the woman stammered between her sobs. "I lost my footing." A large piece of concrete lay beside her. Her leg was badly crushed. "Bandage her up," Agnes ordered, pointing to the colonnade. 3 legionnaires bore her into the shade. She cursed the useless good-for-nothing. She needed them out of Thebes as soon as they'd checked that Meshita. That wouldn't happen now, nor could they beat a quick retreat if they met with the unexpected. She wasn't giving up for the sake of one useless Anatolian, though. It was her mission, and she was going to see it through. She waved at the others to continue. The rubble was now largely cleared. She marvelled at the great steel portals, picking up her train of thought. There was no way the Caliphate could have built like that centuries ago. Agnes jolted. There was no way. It couldn't have been them, so someone else must have put the stones there. That someone had come later. Perhaps not even that long ago. She could already hear Marcus urging caution. "Hold on," she said. "Check it first." Realization dawned on Strabon's face as the same thought crossed his mind. He motioned to the legionnaires, and all stood clear. One of the women stepped forward. In her hands was a dense ball of rubber, which looked as if it had been pierced with 100 tiny pinpricks. Kneeling, she threw it at the centre of the door. It stuck to the burning metal as if glued there. At first, nothing happened. Then the ball slowly unfurled to reveal a translucent gelatinous mesh, which gradually spread over the entire portal like a giant cobweb. This was so fine that the sunlight continued to reflect off the door underneath, its sheen only slightly dimmed. Agnes marvelled at how such an expanse could be wound into so tiny a device, glancing at the discarded mortar and shrapnel lying in the sand. It was easy to forget how far the Empire had come since those days. The woman tapped her holywatch. Some of the legionnaires withdrew instinctively, but Agnes didn't flinch. The mesh glowed as an electric pulse shot through its surface. Nothing happened. "Negative, Katapana," the legionnaire said. "No ballistic charge detected." Several of the troops exhaled in relief. Agnes smiled at Strabon. "Should I take it down?" the woman asked. Agnes glanced at the doors, Meshita, and colonnade. The Anatolian woman was still writhing in pain as her leg was bound up. Agnes grimaced. She wasn't about to tell the legate they'd left the Meshita unexplored just because of one idiotic kid. The mission must be finished. "Take it down," she commanded. The legionnaires retreated beneath the arcade. Agnes knelt behind a column. Strabon took his place at her side. "Katapana," he said awkwardly, as he watched the troops taking cover behind the other columns. "Back in the temple, if you saw something, I must know." For some time, Agnes stared back at him, but at length turned away. "It was nothing," she replied. "Just the heat." Strabon kept looking at her, undeterred. She grew irritable. "It's this place. The sooner we're out of here, the better. And the sooner the job's done, the sooner we will be," she added, looking at him pointedly. Strabon took her meaning. Checking for the last time that all were in position, he signalled to the pyrotechnic at the far end of the colonnade, raising his holowatch to his mouth. "Tres, duo, unus," he counted down. "Incende." The woman clapped her hand over her wrist, bowing her head between her knees and covering herself with both arms. The mesh blazed white hot. There was an enormous crash, then a gush of hot air. Even in the desert heat, it was as if an oven had opened on their faces, but in a moment it had passed. Strabon was already back on his feet, peering around the column through his goggles. Tapping his visor, he scrutinised the dusty air. As he raised his holowatch to his lips, his face broadened into a smile. "All clear," he said. Agnes and the pyrotechnic followed him back out into the court. The dust gradually settled. Nothing remained whatsoever. All trace of steel had sublimated into thin air. Agnes smirked at the painted hammer and crescent above the lintel. Caliphate or no, whoever'd put those doors there hadn't reckoned with her. They hadn't reckoned with her century. She smiled proudly at the pyrotechnic and slapped her on the back. "Great job. You make Justinia proud." Agnes praised her with a standard legionary compliment. The woman inclined her head, but Agnes had already turned away, agitated. Until now, her troops might have passed out of Thebes unnoticed, but if the enemy really were there, after that explosion, they'd have been left in no doubt. They had to check the Mashita and get out as soon as they could. Glancing back at the injured woman, she unslung her rifle and stepped inside. It was cool, the dry air musty and stale. She reached for her goggles, but the light soon sufficed to make out her surroundings. The building was windowless, the sheer walls of the rotunda stretching up to the dome above. These and the floor were entirely revetted in white marble, completely plain, but for the single exception, on the far wall opposite, of a giant hammer and crescent. The red stenciling of the double adze and the stars at either end of the crescent moon stood out dimly in the shadows. She stiffened instinctively. To either side of the entrance, a narrow stairwell rose to a second-story gallery beneath the dome. Agnes motioned in their direction, and the snipers ascended. The building seemed larger inside than it had looked from without, belying the unholy trickery the enemy were famed for. Or maybe it was just how Spartan everything was, utterly devoid of any decoration save the horrid red crest. She wasn't sure why she was surprised, or what she'd expected. She'd heard about Mashitas before, but it was still shocking somehow. Not an image of Our Lady in sight, not a single icon. She shifted uncomfortably, resisting the urge to leave. She must finish the mission. By now, half the troops were inside. They busily scoured the recesses of the Mashita, but there were few, if any, hiding places. If there were any threat, she'd have known about it by now, but the lack of hideouts also meant there was no obvious place for a cache of contraband. She strode across to the far wall, pulling on her goggles. A holographic display overlaid the visor. Murus Qibla, Qibla wall, appeared in green letters. Next to a shallow alcove, just in front of her, she read Loculamentum Qibla, the Qibla niche. Then, beside this, was the word mihrab, though it wasn't obvious what that referred to. In any case, she didn't understand any of these Saracen words, nor did she care to. They weren't going to tell her whether the drug smugglers had been there, nor where they'd hidden the goods. Beside the hammer and crescent, the words sigillum hostium glowed red. The arms of the enemy. They'd not been there for centuries, though, and neither had anyone else. She looked back over her shoulder. Some of the others were scanning the wall too, evidently to no avail. Straben was fruitlessly testing the floor for trapdoors with the butt of his rifle. She began to wonder what they were doing there. Breaking in had clearly been a waste of time. The whole expedition had been a waste of time. She ripped off her goggles and marched back towards the entrance. Many of the legionnaires were already outside. Some had evidently guessed the game was up before being told. A few stood about listlessly or fussed with their rifles. The sight irritated her. They oughtn't to be wasting time. Her annoyance fast transformed into anger with herself. This was entirely her fault. She was their Katapana, and she had led them there. It was her fault for wasting their time and risking their lives for nothing. She could already see the injured Anatolian beneath the arcade. She felt like a fool. She readied herself to call the retreat. Straben looked up as she crossed the floor. He read the look in her eyes and gestured to the remaining troops to move out. Some looked dejected, but all were evidently relieved to be out of the place. Straben waited for them, then followed out. Agnes, the last to leave, took one final look at the empty Mashita, then sighed and turned to the light. Something glinted in her periphery. She swerved towards the gallery, rifle in hand. Someone was ascending the stairs. She reeled in amazement. Without a moment's hesitation, she bounded after them. Straben's voice called to her from below, but she couldn't wait. Dimly, the reflection came to her that there was no way that whoever it was could have slipped into the machita unnoticed while they were there. Still, how could they have been there before? That was impossible. It didn't matter now. She just had to catch them, whoever they were. She'd already reached the top of the stairs, and they were just ahead. It was immediately clear that they weren't one of hers. They wore no military fatigues and were unarmed. In fact, all they had on them was a simple white shroud, which entirely covered their head and body. She'd seen them before, or at least the hem of their shawl, disappearing from the arcade. She gasped in astonishment. She was following a young girl. The girl stopped at the far end of the gallery and did not turn at Agnes's approach. Her face was entirely covered by a veil. Curiously, too, she was barefoot. The girl had surely seen her, but she gave no sign. Her heart pounded. She recalled her disorientation in the colonnade and began to doubt herself. "Quis es?" Agnes asked. "Who are you?" The girl only stood there, beholding the machita, as if one of the temple statues had come to life and followed her into Thebes. The cloth on the girl's back was coarse, its hems frayed. "Dorsi?" Agnes asked again in her native tongue, without knowing why. The girl shifted. Agnes started, as if she'd stumbled on a desert snake. The girl slowly raised her arm, pointing down at the Qibla wall. Her lips moved beneath her veil. Agnes bent closer, trying to catch the barely audible words. "I-te-te," Agnes managed to grasp. "I-te-te?" It didn't make any sense. She repeated it to herself. "I-te-te, I-te-te, ask," she exclaimed. The girl was speaking Greek. She had no idea why, but that didn't matter. They had a common language. She could reach her. "Ask what?" she said in Greek. The girl didn't respond, but continued mumbling the same. Agnes grew impatient. "I don't understand," she said. "What am I supposed to ask?" The machita was getting hotter as the afternoon drew on. She knelt, drawing right up to the girl's veil. Her lips were clearly visible now. "Aitete kai, ask, and..." Agnes read there. It was like being back at the officers' school in Chalcedon, learning Greek again. She wanted to grab the girl by the shoulders and shake her, but with a great effort she kept still. "Aitete kai dothesetai humin," the girl said. "Ask, and it will be given to you." Ask what, though? And what would she be given? "Ask, and it will be given to you," she repeated, facing Agnes. Her eyes were visible now. Oddly, they were bright blue, more those of Agnes's homeland than of Nubia, and seemed at once far away and yet transfixing. She wasn't sure the girl really saw her at all. It made her uneasy. "It will be given to you," Agnes repeated to herself. As she did so, the girl pointed at the Qibla again, but this time at a specific point on it. Agnes grabbed her goggles. Beside the Qibla niche, illuminated in small green letters, was the word mihrab. "Ask, and it will be given to you." She'd found nothing there before. Of course she hadn't. She hadn't expected to. "Katapana, whom were you talking to?" Straben asked as he approached, but his voice was far away. She had already rushed past him to the stairs and, in a few swift bounds, was back before the Qibla niche. She pressed hard against the sides of the shallow alcove, but the marble didn't budge. That was too obvious. She put her goggles back on. About half passes to the right, mihrab was displayed on the visor. The reading wasn't precise, and the little green letters kept dancing around. She bit her lip. The clever Osmans. You had to know how such places were built. They weren't going to fool her, though. "The game's up, Katapana," came Straben's breathless voice behind her. "Seriously, we've checked everywhere. The trail's dead. There's nothing here. Shouldn't we best get out while it's still light?" Agnes ignored him. She was so close now. There couldn't be any distractions. Not now. "Aitete kai dothesetai humin," she repeated, running her hand over the marble beneath the spinning letters. "Ask, and it will be given to you." Something slipped beneath her fingertips. She froze, her hand glued to the spot. Her heart thumped in her chest. The low sun flooded in, illuminating the wall. Her hair shone gold as the sweat ran down her auburn locks. With 2 fingers, she pressed lightly at the marble. It gave way like paper, revealing a small recess concealed within the previously unbroken sheen of white stone. "Good Justinia!" Strabon gasped. Hearing this, some of the legionnaires re-entered the Meshita and gathered around. There was no time to explain. In the meantime, they could deal with the girl. That was all in the background, though. Her prize was before her. She moved her hand to the gap in the wall. "Katapana, shouldn't we first?" Strabon asked, but was overtaken by his own excitement. Shooing him away, she held her wrist up to the gap. Strabon knelt beside her eagerly, his canine eyes aglow. She smiled happily. The chase was up. She tapped her holowatch to activate the torch. This time, it was her turn to gasp. Inside the vault, a tiny white brick glowed like a luminescent pearl within a shell. Nectar. The smuggler's contraband of choice. Compacted in that little block was enough of the drug to supply a whole city for 6 months. Half alone would buy a Vestal's palace. That was why they'd walled up the Meshita. That was why they didn't want anyone in Thebes. But their secret was out now. Her mission was accomplished. She thrust her hand into the wall. She just had time to see Strabon flinch, trying to restrain her. Then several things happened at once. There was a deafening crack, a loud puff, and Strabon crying her name. As she snatched her hand away, a force propelled her backwards. Her body felt weightless, as if she were floating. Then she was lying on the floor.